The fire had taken everything from Draven Ashcombe 5 years ago, his mate, his newborn daughter, and the warmth that once lived inside his chest. Since that night, he had ruled the Blackthorn Kingdom as a cold and distant Alpha King, a man who gave orders instead of smiles, and who trusted no one beyond the walls of his own study. The official story was simple. The Ashvale Pack, longtime rivals of Blackthorn, had set the fire to weaken his line. Draven had accepted that story, because grief did not leave room for questions. He had mourned, he had hardened, and he had ruled alone. 5 years later, a border dispute forced him to do something he had avoided for a long time. He had to travel into Ashvale territory himself. The negotiation was tense from the first moment. Cale Ashvale, the Pack's alpha, stood across the meeting table with the same guarded expression Draven remembered from years of rivalry. Cale had risen from beta to alpha not long after the fire, taking control of a pack that many believed had been broken by war. The talks dragged through the morning, circling old grievances about land and hunting rights. Draven barely listened. His mind was elsewhere, tired from years of duty without rest. Then he heard laughter outside the meeting hall, a child's laughter. He should not have cared. Children laughed in every territory in the world, but something in the sound pulled at him, a thread he could not explain, tightening around his chest until he found himself standing before he realized he had moved. "Is something wrong, Alpha King?" Cale asked, his voice carefully flat. "I need air," Draven said, and walked toward the door before anyone could stop him. Outside, in a small courtyard framed by autumn trees, a little girl chased a fallen leaf across the grass. She could not have been older than 5. Her hair was dark, her laugh bright and unguarded, and when she turned toward him, Draven's entire body went still. Her eyes were his, not similar, his, the same sharp gray, the same shape, the same intensity that his own mother used to say could see straight through a lie. "Ren," Cale called from behind him, his voice suddenly sharp with warning. "Come inside." The girl obeyed at once, disappearing through a side door, but the name stayed with Draven long after she was gone. Ren. It was the name his mate had chosen for their daughter, months before she was born, back when the world had still felt safe. He turned to Cale, and for the first time in 5 years, his voice shook. "Where did you find her?" Cale's jaw tightened. "She is not your concern." "Where did you find her?" Draven repeated, stepping closer, his wolf rising dangerously close to the surface. "Tell me the truth, or I will tear this territory apart looking for it myself." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Cale exhaled, the fight draining slightly from his shoulders. "The night of the fire. I found her near the border, wrapped in a blanket, crying in the cold. There was no one with her, no survivors close by. I brought her home, because I could not leave a newborn to die in the snow." "And you never once thought to tell me my daughter might be alive?" "I thought about it every day," Cale said quietly. "But someone set that fire on purpose, Draven. If whoever did it discovered she survived, they would have finished the job. I kept her hidden to keep her safe. Not from you. From whoever wanted her dead." Draven wanted to call it a lie. He wanted to feel nothing but fury at the man who had kept his child from him for 5 years. But looking at Cale's face, he saw no deception there, only the exhaustion of someone who had carried a secret far heavier than he ever wanted. "I want proof," Draven said. "Real proof, not a feeling in my chest." Cale nodded slowly. "There is an old bonding ritual. Blood tied to blood will answer honestly, even if we cannot." That night, in a quiet room lit only by candlelight, the ritual was performed. Ren's small hand rested in Draven's larger one, a shallow cut on each of their palms allowing their blood to touch. The moment it did, a warmth spread through Draven's chest unlike anything he had felt in 5 long years. The bond flared to life, undeniable and absolute. She was his daughter, truly, completely his. Draven knelt before her, his composure cracking for the first time since the fire. "Ren," he whispered, and something in her young face seemed to recognize the sound of her own name spoken with such reverence. She looked at him with curious, careful eyes, then glanced toward Cale, as if seeking permission to trust this stranger. Cale gave a small nod, and only then did Ren step closer, resting her tiny hand against Draven's cheek. "Are you sad?" she asked innocently. "No," Draven said, though his voice betrayed him. "I am the happiest I have been in a very long time." In the days that followed, Draven wanted to take her home immediately. His instincts as both a father and a king told him to bring his heir back to Blackthorn where she belonged, surrounded by guards and walls he could control. But Kael refused to let her go so easily. "She has lived here her whole life," Kael said. "If you tear her away without preparing her, you will only frighten her. And there is something else you need to understand before you take her anywhere." "What?" "Someone inside your own kingdom set that fire," Kael said. "Not my pack. I have suspected it for years, but I had no proof, and no one would believe a rival alpha's word against yours." Draven wanted to dismiss it as manipulation, a way for Kael to delay losing the child he had raised. But the accusation lodged itself in his mind and would not leave. If Kael was telling the truth, then the person responsible for his mate's death and the years of grief that followed was someone who still walked freely through his own halls. Reluctantly, Draven agreed to stay in Ashvale territory a while longer, both to allow Ren time to adjust and to investigate the fire properly, this time with clear eyes instead of blind grief. Spending time near Ren changed something in him. He watched her chase butterflies through the garden, watched her fall asleep against Kael's shoulder during long evenings, and felt a strange, aching familiarity, as though he had lived this exact moment before. It unsettled him in ways he could not explain. One night, sitting by the fire while Ren slept nearby, fragments of memory surfaced unbidden, flashes of another fire, another version of losing her, a whispered warning from his grandmother, long dead, about a curse tied to the Ashcombe bloodline, one that repeated itself across generations, unless the true betrayer was finally exposed. He had dismissed the old stories as superstition his whole life. Now, sitting beside the daughter he had already lost once, he was no longer certain. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," Kael said, settling into the chair across from him. "My family has an old legend," Draven admitted. "A curse that follows the firstborn heir. Loss, repeated again and again, until the truth behind the original betrayal is uncovered." Kael studied him carefully. "You believe this has happened before?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Draven said, "but I know I cannot lose her again. Not to fire, not to lies, not to anyone. Then we find whoever set that fire," Kael said simply, "together." It was an uneasy alliance between two men who had spent years distrusting each other, but grief and fear for a child's safety proved stronger than old rivalries. They began quietly investigating the fire, cross-referencing old reports, questioning surviving witnesses, and retracing the exact movements of everyone present that night. The trail eventually led back to Draven's own beta, a man named Corin, who had served faithfully by his side for over a decade. At first, Draven refused to believe it. Corin had comforted him after the fire, had stood beside him through every difficult decision since. But the evidence was undeniable. Financial records showed secret payments made just before the fire. Witnesses recalled seeing Corin near the nursery that night, though he had always claimed to be elsewhere. The motive became clear soon after. With Draven's mate and heir gone, Corin had positioned himself as the king's most trusted advisor, quietly consolidating power and influence with every passing year, waiting patiently for the right moment to seize control entirely, perhaps through a puppet heir he could manipulate, or through Draven's own downfall. When Corin realized that Ren had been found, and that his years of careful plotting were unraveling, he did not wait to be confronted. He acted first. Late one evening, while Draven was away discussing strategy with Kael, Corin arrived at Ashvale territory under the guise of a diplomatic visit. Guards let him through without suspicion, unaware of the danger he carried. He made his way toward the private chambers where Ren slept, intending to finish what the fire had failed to accomplish 5 years earlier. It was Kael's own instincts that saved her. Something felt wrong the moment Corin arrived, an unfamiliar tension in the man's scent, a wrongness that Kael's wolf recognized before his mind fully understood it. He followed quietly, catching Corin just as he reached Ren's door. The confrontation was swift and dangerous. Kael fought to protect the child in his care, buying precious time until Draven arrived, alerted by the commotion echoing through the halls. The sight of Corin standing over his sleeping daughter, ready to end her life for the sake of his own ambition, shattered whatever restraint Draven had left. The battle that followed was brief, but fierce. Years of buried grief and controlled fury poured out of Draven all at once. Corin was strong, but he was no match for a king fighting for his child's life. In the end, justice was swift and final, and the true betrayer, who had haunted Draven's kingdom for 5 years, was gone. Ren, thankfully, slept through most of it, waking only when Draven gathered her gently into his arms afterward, his hands trembling with the aftermath of battle and relief combined. "Is it over?" she asked sleepily, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Yes," Draven whispered against her hair. "It's over now, I promise." In the weeks that followed, peace settled over both territories, in a way that had not existed in generations. Draven returned to Blackthorn with his daughter, but he did not return alone. Kael accompanied them, no longer as a rival, but as an ally bound by shared loss and shared protection of a child, who belonged to both their worlds in different ways. Standing before his full court, Draven formally acknowledged Ren as his true heir, the bloodline everyone believed had ended in fire, now standing proudly beside him, alive and safe. Whispers of the old curse faded into silence, replaced by quiet relief that the cycle, whatever it had been, was finally broken. He extended a formal alliance to the Ashvale Pack, an offer of unity where there had once only been rivalry. Kael accepted, not out of political necessity, but out of genuine respect for the man who had once been his enemy, and had become, through fire and loss and shared purpose, something closer to family. On a quiet afternoon not long after, the three of them stood together at the border between their two territories, the very place where a frightened newborn had once been left in the snow. Ren ran between them, laughing, chasing the same kind of falling leaf that had first caught Draven's attention months earlier, completely unaware of how close she had once come to being lost forever. Draven watched her with a peace he had not known in 5 long years, the ache in his chest finally replaced by something warmer, something whole. "She has your stubbornness," Kael said, watching her demand a leaf that refused to be caught. "And your patience, apparently," Draven replied, a small smile tugging at his mouth, unfamiliar but welcome. For the first time since the fire that had once taken everything from him, Draven Ashcombe allowed himself to simply exist in a moment of happiness, without fear of what tomorrow might take away. His daughter was safe, his kingdom was secure, and the man he once called rival now stood beside him as something far more valuable. The curse, if it had ever truly existed, was broken. What remained was a family rebuilt from ashes, standing together at the border of 2 worlds finally united as one.